For as long as I can remember, video games have always been a rather large portion of my life. Before I could even talk, my parents, more specifically my father, had bought me a PlayStation 2, and thus I began my journey into my bedroom every day for the next several years for several hours a day. If you asked me a few years ago, I most likely would have told you my favorite game was Half-Life, Star Wars Battlefront, Skyrim, or The Simpsons Hit and Run. Around a year ago, however, that all changed. As I've talked about before, my anime-centered lifestyle began around 3 years ago. Thanks to this newfound love of all things anime, I began to delve into a side of gaming which I never had before, the Japanese releases. Up until 2017, I believe the only Japanese game I had ever played was Kingdom Hearts 2 for the PS2, and I didn't exactly like it. I mean, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't great either as a kid. Confusing and difficult for this dumb blonde, I strayed away from Japanese games until recently. There are numerous lackluster Japanese titles released simply to squeeze money from fandoms such as the first few SAO games and the most recent one, Sword Art Online Alicization Licorice. However, there are other gems, such as most of the Final Fantasy games, Code Vein, and NieR Automata.
Everything that lives is designed to end. We are perpetually trapped in a never-ending spiral of life and death.
From the moment NieR introduced me to its world, I found myself encapsulated in the mystifying and mysterious nature of its story and the many tales it had to tell. I want to refrain from spoiling that as much as possible, so I'll mainly only be using gameplay from the first 30 minutes or so of the game. With that out of the way, I honestly feel like NieR Automata wasn't marketed the greatest. I was scared to purchase it at first, afraid it would be more shoot 'em up than slasher, but to my surprise, it was just the perfect mixture of numerous different genres. Portions of the games are shoot 'em ups, side-scrolling slashers, hack and slashers, and a handful of other mini-games related to hacking and other activities. Just when you think you've been introduced to everything, something new and exciting is added that changes the way you play, usually for the better. The gameplay loop is pretty simple, like most other RPGs of the type. You kill things, level up, get chips to upgrade certain stats, get stronger, and repeat. The next portion I'm going to talk about is a minor spoiler, so skip to the time on screen if you want to avoid that. While A2 and 2B have very similar playstyles, the introduction of 9S as a playable character and his hacking ability allow for some very interesting interactions with enemies throughout the game world. You can take over enemies and fight their own comrades as them, or force them to explode and take out numerous others with them. It's also pretty handy when going up against a tough foe, as it allows you to easily turn the tables if you aren't the greatest fighter. On top of all the gameplay mechanics comes the presentation. If you haven't been living under a rock, actually, I suppose that's probably the only way you know this next part, but there's a lot of Rule 34 artwork on these characters. Not only because every single character is hot or handsome, but also because they're just genuinely well-designed and thought-out characters. Well, that's not the thought process of Rule 34 artist, but for me it is. So much so that their names, designs, or personalities are reflecting real-life philosophies or philosophers, such as 2B's name, to be or not to be, or Pascal's name, referencing a French mathematician, physicist, inventor, and writer by the same name. Every character feels unique, even the ones you only meet a handful of times. Speaking of well-designed and thought-out creations, this game's soundtrack is quite simply my favorite of all time, most likely. Every song is centered around the theme of the location, scene, or fight, and they usually fit it to a T. Here, take a listen. I don't want to spend too much time talking about the OST, but as I mentioned in my Code Vein video, music can make or break a game for me. To me, NieR's soundtrack was a lot like Minecraft's. The music blended so well into the game world that I honestly didn't realize it was there while playing, but found myself jamming to it anyways. It fits so perfectly with almost every scene that I was almost unconscious to the fact that it was there. To make the characters even better, NieR Automata has a rather expansive world to explore, filled with a desert, forest, city ruins, a factory, Disneyland, albeit better, and a few other environments. While you could just head from objective to objective, there usually is an incentive for exploring, such as trials, chips for better enhancements, and other consumables. However, the game wouldn't be wrapped so nicely without good, consistent mechanics that will fill the majority of your time playing. As I mentioned before, the game has a lot of mechanics it constantly introduces to you. However, what about the actual melee fighting? For a hack and slash, the game has a fun and well-paced moveset given to each weapon individually. Be it if you are a heavy hitter with slow movements, or a speedy tapper with low damage but high output, there's most likely a build for you. I'm honestly not sure what else I can talk about without spoiling the story, so I highly advise you, the watcher, to go out and get the game for yourself whenever you can. If it seems like your type of game, of course. Its PC port sadly isn't the greatest, so it would probably be better to pick it up on console if possible. Nevertheless, I'm Aizen, and this has been NieR Automata, a masterpiece. See you in the next one.